The Afghan tribal insurgency began in 1978 with the pro-Soviet Turaki regime. Afghans believed it to be an atheistic, communist regime that would do away with the traditional social structure based on Islam and allegiance to family, clan, and tribe. Afghans have always been devoutly Muslim and distrustful of government, so when the Soviet troops started appearing, their worst fears were confirmed and the insurgency began. It would continue for 10 years, in which the country would be in a state of near constant war that would be exacerbated by a foreign supply of weapons and training.
As the insurgency progressed, the rebel forces would gradually become better equipped and trained as foreign weapons came in and Soviet weapons were captured. In 1985, observers in the countryside noted that insurgent forces had a plentiful supply of small arms and ammunition, and a collection of captured heavy machine guns, mines, rockets, and a small supply of heat-seeking missiles, and they were growing increasingly capable in their use. There was also a steady supply of small arms from neighboring Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, as well as American anti-tank weapons and mines, mortars, and radio equipment that the Soviets never could quite stop due to the multitude of ways in and out of the country. All this meant that as long as the insurgency had a supply of manpower, the war could continue indefinitely.
As the war dragged on, the effect that it was having on the general populace was becoming increasingly known. The public school system was almost non-existent, with teachers fleeing to neighboring countries and the destruction of many schools. As part of their plan to indoctrinate the Afghan people, Soviet forces kidnapped an estimated 50,000 children and sent them off to Russia for indoctrination. These Afghan children that were schooled in Russia found that they could find no meaningful work and were viewed with suspicion at home, and many ended up becoming incredibly antagonistic to the Soviet Union. The Russians also tried to buy loyalty from many with bribes, but this was a temporary solution at best, created a great amount of corruption in the local government, and only served to embitter the Afghan people against the Soviet Union.
There was also the matter of the rebels themselves. The insurgency was being carried out by hundreds of small war bands, most of which were mainly driven by the motives of their own communities, rather than any sense of national patriotism. Many of them wouldn't be considered rebels at all, but farmers and villagers that had arms and resisted when attacked. The only thing many of these groups shared was a hatred of the Soviets and desire to preserve religious tradition. This led to problems with cooperation and tactics among them. It also meant that the insurgents had no clear plan of what to replace the Soviets and the Soviet-backed government in Kabul with, which led to the rise of many political groups, such as the Taliban. This has contributed in no small part to the unstable nature of the Middle East. After talking about what happened behind the scenes, let us now talk briefly about the actual fighting that took place throughout the country of Afghanistan, between the rebels and the Russians. Most fighting took place throughout the vast amount of open space in the Afghan deserts. The rebels mainly embraced the tactics used in most rural conflicts, in that they employed many different kinds of guerrilla combat, never wanting to engage the Russians head-on, seeing as at the time they were quite the military superpower. After completely taking Kabul, the Russians then had to quiet the large amount of insurrectionists still in the country, but seeing as the rebels knew the landscape better, this proved to be the deciding factor in the Russians' decision to pull out of the country, leaving Afghanistan in ruins from which they would never truly recover.
The Russian invasion of Afghanistan ended 10 years after its start in February of 1989 with the withdrawal of Soviet troops from the country. This would set the stage for almost 30 years of conflict that would be the source of much of the political instability in that area of the world.